You know the image. The Pilgrims, often dressed inaccurately in buckle hats, sitting down with smiling natives. They share a perfect feast. This is the story we've been told. But what if that perfect picture is built on a lie? The true history of Thanksgiving is messy. It's chaotic. It is one of the most surprising and, frankly, darkly dramatic stories in American history. Forget the cornucopia. The real narrative begins with mass death. It progresses into a bloody, devastating war. And it ends, absurdly, with a fight over Christmas shopping. We are going to dismantle the myth, piece by piece. You will learn how this cherished American tradition was forged, not out of spontaneous gratitude, but out of desperation, political warfare, and the tireless campaigning of a magazine editor. Prepare to see the story of survival, the story of sovereignty lost, and the most unlikely battle to unify a broken nation. The stakes are simple. If you don't understand where Thanksgiving came from, you don't understand the complex history of America itself. Stick with us. You won't look at the dinner table the same way again. And now, welcome to the history of. We dig deep into the history that schools often gloss over. We find the conflict. We find the characters. If you love history that feels like a dramatic movie, hit that subscribe button. The story begins in 1620. Not with a celebration, but with a disaster. The English colonists, known today as the Pilgrims, arrived in what they called Plymouth. They were not a powerful, well-supplied conquering force. They were weak. The long sea voyage, surviving only on a high-salt diet, had severely weakened their bodies. Their first winter on the American coast was a trial by fire, a trial by ice. The death rate was horrifying. As many as 2 or 3 people died every single day during their first 2 months on land. By the time the Mayflower sailed back to England in April 1621, she left with only half her original crew. Of the original settlers, only 52 people survived the first year. They were clinging to existence. This high mortality rate meant that their survival depended entirely on the assistance of the established inhabitants of the land. The Pilgrims, in accounts like Mort's Relation, often portrayed the land as bountiful and ready for cultivation. Early engravings frequently gave the mistaken impression that the voyagers discovered unsettled land to colonize. But this territory was the ancient homeland of the Wampanoag people. The availability of the land was due to an unprecedented demographic disaster. Prior to the English arrival, European visitors had carried epidemic diseases that ravaged the region. This onslaught was catastrophic, wiping out an estimated 90% of the local Wampanoag population. Entire villages were left empty. For the deeply religious Pilgrims, finding land cleared by such a disaster would have only furthered their sense of divine purpose. They believed they were part of God's plan, and the empty land seemed to confirm their destiny, fueling their confidence despite their perilous situation. This underlying sense of religious superiority would prove to be a dangerous hidden factor in the years that followed. When Wampanoag leader Osamequin, known to the English as Massasoit, finally engaged with the Plymouth colonists, it was not an act of simple kindness. It was a strategic, geopolitical maneuver. The remaining Wampanoag people were struggling to defend themselves against the powerful Narragansett tribe, who had been less affected by the plague and now significantly outnumbered them. Osamequin saw the English, despite their physical weakness, as a potential military asset, particularly due to their weapons technology. The resulting 1621 treaty was a formal mutual defense pact. The English recorded that both sides agreed not to injure the other and to send offenders for punishment. Critically, they also agreed on military cooperation. If any group unjustly warred against Osamequin, the English would aid him, and if any warred against the English, the Wampanoag would aid them. The Wampanoag supplied the essential knowledge of hunting and planting that saved the English from certain starvation. This truce was transactional, an alliance of 2 communities seeking to secure their survival against mutual threats, not merely a sentimental friendship. The famous 1621 gathering was a 3-day harvest celebration, attended by 52 English settlers and at least 90 Wampanoag men. Both English and Wampanoag cultures included long-established traditions of harvest feasts and celebrations. It is important to remember that this was a secular harvest celebration, distinctly different from the solemn Puritan Day of Thanksgiving, which was typically a day of fasting and prayer, not feasting. The menu provides a surprising counterpoint to the modern holiday. What was on the table was based on seasonally available New England foods. The Wampanoag brought venison, 5 deer according to historical accounts. The English provided wildfowl. However, the event lacked nearly all modern Thanksgiving favorites. Crucially, they had neither the ingredients nor the technology for modern pie crusts. The Pilgrims lacked substantial quantities of key staples, like wheat flour and butter. Furthermore, since apples had not yet been introduced to the area, apple pie was entirely off the menu. While they ate pumpkins, which they called pompion, the earliest recipes treated them more like sliced fried apples, not pie filling. The 1621 gathering was therefore an act of diplomacy. It was a political necessity. It was anything but the sentimental image of perfect colonial friendship we are shown today. The peace brokered in 1621 was historically short-lived. The alliance was continually tested for 50 years by mounting pressures. Colonial land expansion intensified, disease continued to spread, and the exploitation of Wampanoag resources grew with every shipload of new English arrivals. The initial treaty was designed to last only as long as the Wampanoag needed the English more than the English needed the Wampanoag. As the English population exploded and their need for more territory escalated, the pragmatic transactional value of the treaty vanished for the colonists. The eventual collapse of the alliance was seen by many Wampanoag as an inevitable consequence of unchecked colonial desire for dominance. Metacom, the Wampanoag chief known as King Philip, recognized this shift. He saw that the only path remaining for his people was war, or the total surrender of their political independence and land. This existential struggle erupted in King Philip's War, or Metacom's Rebellion, between 1675 and 1676. This conflict represented the Native Americans' last-ditch effort to reject English authority and halt further settlement on their ancestral lands. The war was ignited by the murder of John Sassamon, a Christian Indian who warned Plymouth Colony of Metacom's plans, followed by the English execution of 3 Wampanoag men. This act incensed Metacom and triggered retaliatory raids, such as the initial attacks on the Swansea colony. The fighting quickly spread across New England. Metacom's confederacy assaulted settlements across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Maine. They successfully attacked Plymouth Plantation and forced many citizens to flee to the coast. The settlers learned there was no safe place to hide. The conflict was characterized by profound violence and destruction on both sides, resulting in thousands of deaths. When Metacom was finally killed in 1676, the colonists declared victory. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic for the Wampanoag. Surviving native people were sold into slavery, and the colonists seized massive tracts of land, fundamentally shifting the balance of power permanently in favor of the European arrivals. The war was a critical turning point that cemented English expansion and severely diminished native resistance across the region. Following this brutal conflict, the meaning of Thanksgiving for the English colonists took a profoundly dark and severe turn. During King Philip's War, colonial authorities began proclaiming days of Thanksgiving after successful military actions and devastating attacks on Native American villages. These observances were no longer about a peaceful harvest feast. They were solemn, public worship services designed to offer gratitude for events signaling God's favor, which, in this context, meant military victory. The holiday essentially morphed into a declaration of colonial triumph and territorial dominance. This recontextualization highlights the severe moral cost and the immense cultural loss that defined the subsequent relationship between colonists and indigenous peoples. For the Wampanoag people, this historical legacy ensures that the Pilgrims' entry into their homeland is often remembered today not as a moment of giving thanks, but as a day of deep mourning. The modern first Thanksgiving myth is viewed as deeply damaging because it romanticizes and makes light of a historical trauma that resulted in the devastation of their society and the loss of their sovereignty. For nearly 2 centuries after the events of King Philip's War, Thanksgiving remained an irregular, non-standardized colonial or state observance, often declared for a variety of reasons at different times of the year. The holiday needed an architect, a visionary who understood the power of tradition and media to manufacture a national culture. That architect was Sarah Josepha Hale. Hale was an editor of unprecedented influence, managing Godey's Lady's Book, a magazine that reached an immense, predominantly female audience across the country, peaking at 150,000 readers monthly. Starting in the 1830s, Hale launched a tenacious 36-year campaign to lobby governors and U.S. presidents to declare Thanksgiving an official national annual holiday. She leveraged her magazine platform, publishing articles, editorials, and specific Thanksgiving recipes. She urged her readers to lobby their own representatives and share their experiences. Hale's motivation was profound. She perceived rising factionalism in American society and envisioned Thanksgiving as a unifying union festival. She argued that a common, patriotic holiday rooted in domesticity and simple, rural values would help unite Americans in purpose. Hale's decades-long effort culminated at the height of the most profound crisis in American history, the Civil War. On September 28, 1863, Hale wrote directly to President Abraham Lincoln, urging him to use his executive power to provide the necessary national recognition and authoritative fixation for the holiday. Less than a week later, on October 3, 1863, Lincoln issued his famous Thanksgiving Day proclamation. Lincoln, who officially declared the last Thursday of November as the day of observance, was using the holiday as a political tool for national healing. The language of the proclamation intentionally shifted the focus from mere celebration to shared national humility and grief. Lincoln asked Americans to offer thanks, but also to pray with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience. He specifically called on the nation to commend to God's care all those who had become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife. By establishing a unified, mandatory day of simultaneous prayer and reflection, Lincoln intentionally repurposed Thanksgiving, leveraging Hale's domestic agenda to attempt to bind the wounds of the fracturing nation. The holiday, as Americans now know it, was formalized as an emergency political measure to promote unity during a war that tore the country apart. Lincoln's proclamation established the tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the last Thursday of November. This tradition, held until the economic pressures of the Great Depression, introduced the final, most absurd conflict in the holiday's evolution. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt observed that November had 5 Thursdays that year, meaning the holiday would fall late on November 30th. At the time, unwritten rules frowned upon starting Christmas shopping before Thanksgiving, hoping to stimulate the struggling national economy by lengthening the crucial Christmas retail season. Roosevelt unilaterally moved the date back a week to the 4th Thursday. The move caused instant, widespread public chaos and political outrage. The mayor of Atlantic City immediately derided the change, coining the lasting term Franksgiving, a portmanteau of Franklin and Thanksgiving. Republicans decried the move as an insult to Lincoln's memory. The nation was thrown into confusion, with 32 states adopting the new date and others defiantly sticking to the traditional last Thursday. This situation of 2 competing Thanksgivings persisted until Congress intervened. In late 1941, to end the seasonal chaos and satisfy the demands of the Midwest turkey industry, which needed a fixed date to ensure supply, Congress unanimously passed a joint resolution. This resolution officially and permanently fixed Thanksgiving Day as the 4th Thursday of November. The ultimate institutionalization of the holiday was not driven by religious piety or historical fidelity, but by the necessity of securing the American commercial calendar. The history of Thanksgiving reveals that it is a holiday of profound and often tragic complexity. It is not a singular event, but a narrative constructed in 3 distinct eras, each marked by high-stakes conflict. The Survival Era, 1621. A desperate transactional alliance between dying Pilgrims and decimated Wampanoag, focused on immediate survival after a demographic catastrophe. The Sovereignty Era, 1675. The violent collapse of the alliance during King Philip's War, resulting in the redefinition of Thanksgiving by colonists as a celebration of conquest and dominance. The Engineering Era, 1863 to 1941. the political invention of the modern holiday, leveraged by Lincoln to promote national unity during the Civil War, and finalized by Congress to regulate commerce and end the absurdity of Franksgiving. This evolution demonstrates how shared national traditions are often the composite results of historical trauma, calculated political maneuvering, and economic necessity. Modern traditions, like annual football games, which began shortly after Lincoln's proclamation in 1876, and the proliferation of parades, such as the Macy's event starting in 1924, further cemented the holiday's identity as a secular, spectacle-driven event that serves as the gateway to the retail season. The true value of studying the history of Thanksgiving is the recognition that tradition is not static. Understanding its complex origins forces us to acknowledge the full scope of American history, including the immense trauma suffered by the Wampanoag people. Ultimately, the holiday calls us to a higher standard of appreciation. It is not simply about uttering thankful words, but integrating that gratitude into meaningful actions. As the philosopher Seneca noted, nothing is more honorable than a grateful heart. To be truly grateful for the enduring traditions of the nation requires acknowledging the full, messy, and dramatic journey that created them. To close, we use the words of John F. Kennedy, a reminder that appreciation requires action. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them.